One interesting element about this relational model is while you design the database itself, while you are designing this database schema, on the schema means, you know that, right? Schema means the headings. I mean, that is the simplest way to remember. So while you are designing the schema itself, you can specify some restrictions on how the data has to be inserted into the schema. That is the interesting feature, which means in the design level of this, we could put even more restrictions on the data which will be updated later. See, now we are just deciding about what are the headings of the relations and how many tables are going to be there, and how many, what is the headings of each table, and what are the attributes. That is what is being decided at this design model, right? And at the modeling of the design itself, we could even put some restrictions saying that see, the values which have to be inserted into these tables should follow these restrictions, right? And this kind of facility was not completely available in the ER model. In the ER model, we will not be able to put many restrictions on the data that will be inserted later. But now here in the relational model, while designing itself, we are going to put many restrictions, especially on the schema. Schema means the headings. We don't have the data at our hand yet, but still in the headings itself, we are going to put lots of restrictions. And the main restrictions are actually 4 types. You can remember it this way. See, they are also called as constraints. Constraints are nothing but the restrictions. Okay, the same meaning. Restrictions or constraints, which means whatever data you are going to insert into these tables, they are supposed to obey your restrictions. Otherwise, they will not be inserted, or they will not be updated or modified. Right. So the most important constraints are, one is domain constraint. So domain means whatever we do on the domain itself, right? So I'll talk about it. And next one is key constraints. Key constraints talk about the uniqueness. We already know that a relation is a set. Therefore, no two tuples are supposed to have the same values, right? But then some of the values of the tuples may be same, right? For example, if you look at the marks, you cannot say that no two marks should be same for a student. Marks can be same, right? But then the entire tuple, when it is considered, it should not be same. In order to implement this, we are going to use uniqueness constraints, and key constraints are also called as uniqueness constraints. I'll talk about it. And next one is entity integrity constraints, which means the entire tuple itself has to follow some of the constraints. We shall see it. And then referential integrity. So referential integrity is actually a different thing, because all the other constraints are actually applied on one table, but when you talk about referential integrity, they are applied between two relations, which means two tables. So one table, while we do some modifications on one table, the other table is also involved in somehow, okay, in some matter. So now let's see domain constraints first. So domain constraints is like this. Let us take some example and I'll show you what the domain constraint means. Let us say there is student table. It is a student relation, right? Then what are the domain constraints is, every value or every domain that you choose for an attribute, it has to follow the domain. For example, student name. Now you might define the domain for student name to be set of characters, or set of characters of variable length. If you have defined it, then all of them are going to follow that. And moreover, one main thing about the relation is, you can view a relation like this as a flat file structure. Flat file means no hierarchy is allowed. So in case if you have any attribute which is a name, right? Even though name is an attribute which is a composite attribute, such a kind of attribute is not allowed in relational model. The reason is, every element that you are going to insert into the attributes of any tuple should be atomic. Atomic means smallest individual unit, right? So it cannot be divisible. It has to be indivisible. For example, if you take name, Name can be further divided into three parts: first name, middle name, and last name, right? So whenever you have such a domain, such as an attribute such as a name, it is better that you split up that composite attribute into simple attributes, right? So instead of having name, you are supposed to have first name, maybe middle name, and last name. This is allowed. So what I mean to say is, every domain should contain atomic values. You are not supposed to allow these composite attributes. You are supposed to allow only simple attributes. And sometimes you might have some domains which are multi-valued, right? Like phone number, a person might have many phone numbers, right? So in this case, this multi-valued attribute should also be not allowed, right? So which means we are not going to have more than one value for any attribute, or we are not going to have a collection of many values for a attribute. So domain constraints say that we are not going to allow either composite attributes or multi-valued attributes into the domain. So everything that you insert has to be atomic, which means the smallest indivisible part. If you are going to have any bigger than atomic, then you are supposed to break it either in the same table or in a different table. Generally what we do is, whenever we have these multi-valued attributes, we construct a new table or relation specially for that attribute, and in case of composite attribute, we break them. Later I'll show you how to deal with it. We are not going to talk about it here, but then there are ways to convert any non-atomic attribute into atomic attribute. There are definitely ways possible, right? So what does this constraint say is, whatever schema you are going to design in relational database, see that the entire schema of attributes should always be atomic. That is what is domain constraints. Got it? And once you decide about how many attributes are going to be there, it is generally going to be fixed. See, generally we insert and delete the data into the database, which means we insert and delete the tuples into the relation, but then once we fix up the domain, the entire schema, we are not going to change it, right? So this is all about the domain constraints. Now let's see the key constraints. Okay.